We are on a hot August day looking at a milestone. This is session number 40, and we're starting in Malachi 2, verse 17, and going through the first 6 verses of chapter 3. The title, God's Justice Challenged. As the last go-around, just like it, this fourth courtroom segment is also leveled at the general population. God moved from their lack of respect and honor in the previous episode to another complaint. The complaint is very straightforward. The people of Judah were challenging God's justice, one of his primary attributes, of course. Chapter 2, verse 17. You have wearied Yahweh with your words, but you say, how have I worried him? Because you say, everyone who does evil is good in Yahweh's opinion, and he delights in them. Where is the God of justice? Well, consider Isaiah 40, verse 28. Do you not know, have you not heard, the Lord is an eternal God, the creator of the whole earth. He does not get tired or weary. There is no limit to his wisdom. So Malachi seemingly has described a God who does not become weary as actually being weary. Well, of course, Isaiah was speaking of weariness in action, and Malachi is speaking about weariness of attitude. The two are not the same, of course, because Judah had been questioning God's attributes of faithfulness and justice by misreading what they saw around them. Things were going bad. The priesthood was corrupt. There was sin and idolatry, improper marriages. Things were not right in Israel. Habakkuk faced a similar kind of situation where he took a look at all the things going on around him, and he also mistakenly prayed about God's justice. Listen to this, Habakkuk 1, verses 2 and 3. How long, Lord, must I cry for help, but you do not listen? I call out to you, violence, but you do not intervene. Why do you force me to experience injustice? Why do you put up with wrongdoing? Destruction and violence confront me, conflict is present, and one must endure strife. So the people in those situations are really saying, I don't have any hope. If God is not faithful and just, I don't have any hope for any kind of order and sense of justice. So the question then becomes, how can there be hope if God is not trustworthy in matters of justice? And you could even ask it slightly differently. How can there be any hope if God can change? The Israelites, remember, believed God was a God of justice. But now he doesn't seem to be a God of justice. Has he changed? But if God is not immutable, what does that mean for my hope? Well, what does God do to counter this claim? Kind of interesting. He offers a glimpse into a future day where his justice will deal punishment for all injustice. In other words, God is going to show them there's a day coming when things will be set right. They will be set the way you think they should be. There was an atheist philosopher, I think it was Nietzsche, who said, yeah, I don't believe in God, but if you're going to live a reasonable life and not be driven mad, you have to believe that there is a final judge who will set everything straight in terms of justice, because justice does not normally happen during life on this earth, at least not all justice. So in effect, Nietzsche was really saying, there isn't a God, but you need to believe in him as one who will set all things right, or you'll have a hard time living. Let's go to verse 1 of chapter 3, where we find God speaking. He says, I'm about to send my messenger who will clear the way before me. Now, from the New Testament, we know that that's a reference to John the Baptist. But now he shifts gears a bit. Indeed, Adonai you are seeking will suddenly come to his temple. So Adonai is a term for the sovereign one. And if you have a sovereign one who's come to his temple, that sovereign one must be God. And he goes on, and the messenger of the covenant whom you long for is certainly coming. And most people believe that that messenger of the covenant is the promised Messiah who will come and set everything straight. Now, this verse is widely alluded to in the Gospels, but generally Isaiah gets the credit for it. Isaiah 43, for example, a verse you probably know, a voice cries out, in the wilderness clear a way for the Lord, construct in the desert a road for our God. So he's going to prepare a road. Well, typically that would have been a road for a king in that culture. But who is this king for whom John the Baptist is preparing the way? It's Yahweh. He said, preparing the way for me, and Yahweh is speaking. Well, that means that John the Baptist was clearing the way for God, as we just said. Now, John actually cleared the way for whom? For Jesus. What would that lead you to believe? If John was to clear the way for God, and he cleared the way for Jesus, that probably implies that Jesus is God. Okay, well, got a mouthful there, don't we? Let's look at the word suddenly. It doesn't mean in the near future, but carries the notion of unexpectedness. Something's going to happen without warning. So God is saying in the future, sometime, and it's of course still in the future, he says these things are going to happen. There's going to be a messenger that clears the way for me, and John the Baptist did clear the way for Jesus. He said, Adonai is coming to his temple. Think about that for a minute. Who came to the temple? Jesus. Did he come unexpectedly? Well, the first time we have record of him coming to the temple as an adult, he came and cleansed it. Was that sudden? Apparently there was no warning. The guys in there selling goods and services were upset. They didn't know it was coming. But there were some people who knew that these things were going to happen. In particular, some people related to John the Baptist. First would be the angel Gabriel, who delivered the message in Luke 1:16 and 17, delivered the message to Zechariah, John the Baptist's father, that, what did it say? Let me look in verse 17. And he, John the Baptist, will go as a forerunner before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers back to their children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready for the Lord a people prepared for him. So, Gabriel obviously knew. Therefore, when he was given the message, Zechariah knew it. Matter of fact, Zechariah later told his child, John the Baptist, that that's who he was. So John the Baptist knew it. And he even said in John 1:23, John the Baptist said, I am the voice of one shouting in the wilderness, make straight the way for the Lord, as Isaiah the prophet said. And in Matthew 17, you find out that Jesus also knew, because he explained in such a way at that time that even his 12 disciples knew he was speaking of John the Baptist. There's another description in verse 1, the messenger of the covenant. We saw that, but who is this who could be called the angel of the covenant? Same word as messenger. Well, this angel was someone the Jews were likely waiting for, probably the Messiah. They were expecting a Messiah to come, set everything in order with the law, take care of all of the problems with the Romans and such. So it likely was the Messiah. But make it the connection, the Messiah, Jesus, second person of the Trinity. If you remember back in several of our sessions in the Old Testament, earlier on, there was one called the angel of Yahweh, the angel of Jehovah, and most seem to believe that that was the pre-incarnate second person of the Trinity, the person who incarnated as Jesus, who was then the Messiah. So the messenger of the covenant, Malach of the covenant, could well be Malach Yahweh, this time as a person named Jesus. So all of those things from the Old Testament are tied together. So what's the purpose of this messenger who's coming? Well, we'll discuss that in a minute. But first I want to drop down to verse 6 in this chapter 3 and note one of the very important attributes of God. We've already mentioned it, but it's worth mentioning again. Yahweh is immutable. He does not change. Malachi 3:6, since I, Yahweh, do not go back on my promises, you sons of Jacob have not perished. What's he telling these guys? If I could change, you guys would have been out of here as a nation. But I do not change. I keep all of my covenant promises. Therefore, you still exist as a nation. You don't have any reason to in terms of your performance, but my faithfulness has kept you as a nation. So its immutability is the attribute that guarantees that what God promises, he will deliver. In spite of Israel's unfaithfulness, in spite of our unfaithfulness, God remains faithful to his promises. There was Israel's hope. Well, let's pop ahead, or in this case, I guess back to verse 3 of Malachi chapter 3. He, the Messiah, the messenger of the covenant, will act like a refiner and purifier of silver, and will cleanse the Levites and refine them like gold and silver. Then they will offer the Lord a proper offering. There's a purge of the Levites and the priests coming. And this messenger of the covenant will be responsible for that purging. Israel's not going to disappear. In fact, it's going to be restored. Now, how do we know that these verses, that verse 3, refers to judgment and purging, particularly of Israel? Well, because of terms like refined and cleansed. Refined like gold and silver means to take out the dross. So you purge gold and silver of its corruptive characteristics, and it becomes pure gold, pure silver. So when that happens, there will be a restoration of the priesthood out of that corruption, which we saw in one of the earlier rounds. And they're going to go back to their proper role in the sacrificial system. Well, let me give you a little bit of a side note. Immutability is why we as believers can rest confidently in the assurance of what God's promised the believer will come to fruition. We don't need to have any concern about that. But what does immutability mean for the unbeliever? Now, that's quite another story. When that messenger of the covenant comes to fill the desires of believers, he also come to judge and subsequently then destroy the unbeliever. Bank on him. This person, all of these are the messenger, the Adonai, or the messenger of the covenant, Adonai, they're all Jesus Christ. Malachi then in verse 4 summarizes what will happen when he comes and the purge takes place. Verse 4, the gift of Judah and Jerusalem will be pleasing to the Lord. Remember earlier, God had said, I'm not accepting this stuff from you, these unacceptable sacrifices. But now notice, the gift of Judah and Jerusalem will be pleasing to the Lord, as in former times and years past. So there's a restoration of the sacrificial system to where Judah will now be offering offerings and sacrifices acceptable to the Lord. Well, they don't even have a temple right now, right? So what's going to be the case? Well, when is it going to take place? When will all the social matters be corrected? Well, verse 5. I will come to you in judgment. I will be quick to testify against those who practice divination, those who commit adultery, those who break promises, those who exploit workers, widows, and orphans, who refuse to help the immigrant, and in this way show they do not fear me. In other words, the unbelievers are the ones that better watch out. Now, Revelation 22 and verses 15, 16, you find a similar list of those that are going to be driven out. Now, Yahweh, remember, translation of I am who I am, or I will be who I will be. In other words, Yahweh is an uncaused being who cannot not be. One who has no cause. We're talking about an uncaused being, or sometimes in philosophy called an uncaused first cause. This first cause has no cause itself. This first cause has always been. This first cause always is. The first cause always will be. And this first cause does not change. That's our God. Our God has no cause. He has always existed. He currently exists. He will always exist, and he does not change. If God can change, confidence in all his promises goes out the window. Think about it. If God can change who he is today, how do you know who he will be tomorrow? Well, our God is immutable. He's not like that. Let me give you a couple of takeaways, if you might. There's a time coming when Israel will be fully and finally restored. You can see that in Romans 11:26. Paul speaks about the time when all Israel will be saved. So what time is being discussed? The millennial kingdom, the 1,000-year reign of Christ on this earth. And then there is a third thing to be seen. The process will result in a purging of Israel. As a matter of fact, if you will look in Zechariah 13:8, you will find out that the purging process results in the destruction of 2/3 of the Jews living at the time that judgment takes place. So the purging will be expensive. 2/3 of the Israelites will be destroyed. 1/3 will go into the millennial kingdom. All those left after the purging will enter. Well, in the next session, we're going to see God offering Israel a deal.